this time of the year, obviously. OSHA does a number of heat-related fatalities every year, usually in the construction industry. But it's a major thing, and we have an emphasis program on heat stress where we're trying to get information out to the public to educate them on this and the signs and symptoms to look out for to minimize any hazards of heat stress. Just real quick, I'm going to cover just a heat index table and then some signs and symptoms of heat stress, heat stroke, and then we'll cover some solutions to this stuff that we're seeing in the workplaces. The heat index chart is put out by NOAA, and it gives air temperatures and relative humidity, and it determines what category you're in based on those two factors. Usually in Ohio in the middle of July and August, we're going to be in the danger or extreme caution areas, outside, inside in factories, steel mills, foundries, plastic injection molding companies, or any facility that has a hot process. It's real easy to get into this extreme danger category based on ambient air temperature and humidity. So the signs we have of heat is obviously thirst, profuse sweating, and fatigue. Then it progresses as we go across the right-hand side of this table here. We get pale, cool skin, weakness. That's when then the headaches start kicking in, chills, goosebumps. People stop sweating. They start getting lightheaded, dizzy. Confusion is a strong one. And then eventually they would collapse in an extreme case. Muscle cramps are also common. We're going to talk quickly about each one of these categories and what to look out for and what the symptoms are, and then we'll go into some solutions to try to minimize the effects of heat stress. Transient heat fatigue. This is when you're outside working with protective equipment on, or just on a regular construction site with protective equipment on. You start getting tired and fatigued. Those are usually the first symptoms you start showing with heat. And whenever you start getting really tired or fatigued, the best thing to do is to rest a little bit and to drink some fluids. Folks sometimes get heat rash. The skin becomes red and it feels prickly. That's a second symptom of heat stress. Heat syncope, that means fainting, dizziness, feeling lightheaded, perhaps nausea, and then you eventually faint. If these symptoms occur, it's best to lay the victim in a cool location on the ground with the feet elevated and give them fluids as quickly as possible. Fast heat syncope, we get heat cramps, pretty self-explanatory when you have cramping muscles in your arms, back, legs. The best thing to do when you start experiencing heat cramps is obviously to drink some sort of Gatorade or electrolyte solution, if anything, water, and it's time to take a break. Heat exhaustion is one of the end games when it comes to heat stress. You start getting sick to your stomach, nausea, dizziness, a splitting headache, blurred vision, profuse sweating. And when it goes past that, you start getting into unconsciousness, coma, and death. If you start getting into heat exhaustion, you need to lay the victim down, administer fluids if they're conscious, and start calling 911. Heat stroke, chills, restlessness, irritability, euphoria, red face. Disorientation is the big one here. Dry skin, collapse, unconsciousness, convulsions, and then potentially death. When you start seeing symptoms like this, especially the disorientation, it's time to get that person to an emergency room as quick as possible or call 911. Once again, heat stroke, dry skin, high body temperature, confusion, clammy skin. All these types of symptoms are indicative of heat stroke. So those are obviously the physical signs and symptoms, but there are also indirect costs associated with the employer and to the employee from the effects of heat. You have reduced work performance. Anybody who has employees working in a high heat environment next to a plastic injection molding machine or a heat treat furnace, any type of hot process involving hot water, folks get really hot and their performance goes down. They get fatigued. They start making mistakes. You start seeing increased accidents due to the tired and fatigue, more susceptible to accident injury. There is some reproductive problems, and the big thing too is the heart and lung strain. And we'll talk about this a little bit when folks are wearing N95 masks or respirators or other types of PPE, is the heart and lung strain. It's really hard to breathe when you're wearing PPE or respirators or face masks and you're working outside or in a hot environment. It takes a toll on you. It wears you down. And it's just not a good thing. If you're put in a situation where you're exposed to levels of high heat, there's a few things that predispose you to getting heat stress or potentially heat stroke. If you have a very small body size, you're overweight, over 40 years old, if you've had previous heat illness, heart disease, high blood pressure, diabetes, inactivity, physical activity, all these bullet points here make you more vulnerable to the effects of heat stress. And I probably hit half of these just with myself. And I know most people here during this meeting, if you ever worked outside with a dust mask on and mowing the yard or performing some sort of other physical activity outside with a dust mask on or a respirator, you notice it does take a toll on you very quickly. I mean, you gotta sit down. Sometimes you gotta catch your breath. You definitely gotta drink more water because you're sweating more. All these type of personal protective equipment will add up. And if you have these predisposing factors, it could cause a problem. With all these vulnerabilities, who typically gets heat stroke? Young, physically fit males and sick older people. That's what the statistics are showing us. So environmental factors that can make heat stress worse is wearing protective equipment. You're wearing heavy clothing, flame retardant clothing, coveralls, dark colored clothing. If you're wearing Tyvek suits or rain jackets, if you have a wet process, respirator protection, all these types of protective equipment that go on your body will cause you to heat up. In addition to the heat stress from the environment, you have the heat stress from your protective equipment, and it all increases the likelihood of getting symptoms of heat stress. So the one thing that's big right now is wearing face masks or N95 respirators and working in hot environments. We get calls every day into the office about people complaining about heat stress while wearing the mask in the workplace. And they don't even really have to be doing a lot of physical labor. It really doesn't even have to be that hot. If the person isn't used to wearing these in the workplace and then they're doing some sort of activity, they may not be acclimated to wearing this stuff, and it can cause a problem. And I pulled this from OSHA's website. It has to do with should workers wear a face covering while at work in accordance with CDC to prevention for all people, recommendation for all people to do so when in public. And what OSHA said was, it says where cloth face coverings are not appropriate in the work environment due to certain job tasks, such as because they could become contaminated or exacerbate heat illness, employers can provide PPE such as face shields or surgical masks instead of encouraging workers to wear cloth face coverings. Cloth face coverings are the most common things we see out there right now because they can be made at home. There's lots of people selling cloth face coverings on Etsy and online and through their churches and so forth. And if you have an issue where the cloth face coverings are creating a heat stress scenario, OSHA does allow the use of surgical masks, the paper surgical masks, in place of the cloth face mask. Now, if you're working in an area where you have to wear an N95 respirator or a cartridge respirator, we have to evaluate, why are they wearing those respirators? If they're required to protect the employee from COVID because they're doing a medical procedure that exposes the employee to potential COVID airborne particles, then we have to look into other types of cooling methods with that employee, because we can't take them out of the respirator. They have to wear the respirator to protect them from the COVID or the paint vapors or the silica dust or whatever it is they're exposed to in the workplace that they need to be protected from. So we need to look at some other things to keep them cool. And I'll get into a few of those things here shortly. One thing people do is to slowly acclimate themselves to the heat. And this is easier said than done. But in hot industries, what I've seen over the years is some people don't even want to take a vacation if they work in a hot atmosphere, because when they get back from vacation, they struggle because it takes them a while for their body to reacclimate to the heat from their work environment. But acclimation is the gradual buildup of your ability to handle heat. Your sweating becomes more efficient, more sweat quicker with less salt in your sweat. Blood flow to the skin is reduced, more blood is available to muscles. Heart rate's more stable. Heat stroke volume increases, heart stroke volume increases, and blood volume increases. So these four things here are what happens when your body becomes acclimated to the heat. It doesn't take very long to lose that acclimation, and it does take a little bit of time to gain the acclimation. But acclimation is one of the big things that we rely on to get people used to the heat slowly. If you can't acclimate, then what OSHA recommends is rest and fluids, more frequent breaks. So we ask employers to let their employees rest in a cool area more frequently than what they would typically allow them to. Drink lots of water. Employers will usually provide Gatorade or water in the workplace and encourage employees to drink water more frequently. And then the big thing is to watch out for each other. If workers are noticing other employees behaving strangely or looking like they're sick or just not with it, they need to speak up. Sometimes, because when you're suffering from heat stress, you may not know it. You may know it's hot out, but you may not know you stopped sweating or that you're becoming disoriented, but your coworkers will. A worker heading into heat stroke will no longer realize what's happening to him or her. It's vital that coworkers be able to recognize what's happening and intervene. And without quick intervention, that coworker's physical status could quickly decline. The best thing we can recommend is to start work well hydrated. Drink plenty of water throughout the day. Consider sports drinks for electrolyte replacement if employees are sweating a lot. Avoid drinking pop and other sugary drinks. Avoid drinking lots of tea or coffee or alcohol. All of these will dehydrate you quicker. And don't wait to be thirsty. Drink, because it may be too late. When we run into guys that are doing roofing work out in this heat, usually they'll be drinking constantly. And it's not uncommon for a person roofing a house to drink a gallon of water and never come down off the roof to go to the bathroom because they're sweating so much while they're up there. So avoid drinking pop and alcohol, coffee or tea. Drink lots of water even when you're not thirsty. You can tell by the urine color how dehydrated people are. We see these in a lot of restrooms and a lot of factories, on job sites, where it's just a memory jogger for employees to keep an eye on their urine color to determine their their dehydration level. The darker the color of the urine, the worse it is. Some places can use fans. Not all places can use fans. I know in the summertime, fans are a constant battle in factories. It's one method to control heat stress, but only where it's feasible, obviously. And we got to make sure that we don't let fans interfere with local exhaust ventilation for industrial processes. Well, we don't want to bring in a fan and create another problem with an employee being overexposed to a hazardous air contaminant. Misting fans can be used in some locations. Obviously, they can't be used everywhere. We've also seen swamp coolers being used where it's similar to a misting fan. Cool vests are used quite frequently when we inspect foundries, steel mills, or other hot types of processes. And what it is, the vest they wear underneath their work uniform, and they can insert ice packs into it. We see this a lot where folks are pouring molten metal and it's 100 degrees outside. They'll start wearing these cool vests. And they're really, really effective in keeping people cool during a hot process. Once again, when it comes to heat, OSHA recommends drinking a lot of water, giving folks additional rest breaks, and then providing shade if they're working outside. Those are the three things. If folks are having to wear the mask because of COVID and there's a potential heat issue there, then we recommend water and rest. Or maybe changing from the cloth face coverings to a surgical mask that's not quite as thick and it's easier to breathe through. Or putting people in some face shields to minimize the spread of the COVID. That's all that I have for my presentation. Here's my contact information, and I'll leave this on the screen for a while. And if Lori wants to chirp back in, she can, and I'll take some questions.
Sure. So anyone that has a question, if you want to post that in the chat box or just say, I have a question as the note in the chat box, and I can unmute your microphone and you can ask that question to Todd. We'll give folks a minute to figure out that functionality. If you're new to Zoom, you'll find the chat box I believe on the lower part of your screen. I think everybody's screens ends up looking about the same.
We're waiting on questions. I forgot one thing in my update. I want to make sure everybody were aware that the DWC staff is doing webinars that last approximately an hour long. So I know Lori's been sending those out to everyone, but just want to remind you of those. So look for those. They're on a variety of different topics. I've got one coming up on the 25th of July, or excuse me, August. It is fault protection and inspection of your equipment. So it's going to be geared specifically to inspections only. So if that's something of interest to you, look for that. And it's on the 25th of August, starting at 11:30.
Okay, I'm not seeing any questions pop up in the box. So if I could ask Todd to stop his screen share, I am going to pop up an announcement for next month's meeting, so you can hear about that.
Stop share, okay. Should be back to you now, Lori.
Okay. So hello. Thank you so much, Todd, for your information that you just provided for us. We appreciate that very much. And like I said, we didn't have anyone that had a question that I'm seeing in the box.
If you have any questions, not just for heat stress, but for anything, whether that be, I know right now OSHA is, we're seeing a lot of companies that are mandatorying the N95 respirators, and they don't have respirator programs in place. So if you're mandating N95 respirators, it's imperative that you get a respirator program in place. And BWC can help you with that. And if you give me a call, I can walk you through the process over the phone with that.
Okay, thank you, Todd, for that. So our next Safety Council meeting will be on September 9th. We're always meeting on the second Wednesday of the month. And the topic will be, why do I feel so sad, angry, worried? Keep adding feelings to that. Coping with pandemic stress. And that will be presented by Marianne Bowden from Bowden Associates. So we all know that there's lots of mental health issues going on right now, and this will address some of those things so you can be a support to your employees and to yourself as we work through all of these things over the coming months. So that concludes our program for today. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will be back in touch with you with some additional information, a copy of the PowerPoint that Todd presented this morning, as well as some updates that Eric mentioned in his comments. I'll make sure those are all sent out to the participants today. So there were 42 people on the call today. We are glad to have that number of participants, and hopefully we'll continue to add to that as we go along. So again, thank you so much for joining, and have a good afternoon.
All right, Lori, do you want to stay on, or is it good? Do you want to talk about anything?
I think we're good.
All right, well.
Thanks, Eric.
All right, I'll talk to you guys later. Thanks for inviting me.
All right, Todd, thanks.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay.